I called a family dinner to announce my will. After 50 years building my construction company, I wanted transparency about my legacy. My son David seemed uncomfortable, but my daughter-in-law Jennifer smiled a little too much that evening, her eyes calculating as she clinked her wineglass against mine. When I excused myself to the restroom, a waitress grabbed my arm. "Sir," she whispered, pressing a folded napkin into my palm, "do not drink your wine." My heart nearly stopped when I read her next words. The note read, "Your daughter-in-law slipped something in it when you were looking at the menu." I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, the fluorescent lights accentuating every line on my 68-year-old face. The face of Baxter Reynolds, founder and CEO of Reynolds Construction, widower, father of one son, and apparently the target of my daughter-in-law's sinister plan. The bathroom door swung open, and I quickly pocketed the note. My hands trembled slightly as I splashed cold water on my face. I needed time to think, to process what was happening. Was this real? Why would Jennifer want to harm me? I thought back to when David first brought her home 3 years ago. It had been only 8 months after the tragic car accident that took his first wife, Laura. Too soon, I had thought at the time, but who was I to judge grief? Laura and David had been high school sweethearts, married for 15 years with no children. Her death had nearly destroyed him, and if Jennifer helped him heal, who was I to interfere? Jennifer had been all smiles and charm that first dinner. 35 to David's 42, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and an attentiveness that seemed almost rehearsed in retrospect. She had asked all the right questions about my company, about my late wife Mary, about family traditions and heirlooms. I had written it off as genuine interest, a desire to connect with her new family. But over the past year, small things had begun to nag at me. The way Jennifer's eyes lingered on the painting in my study that Mary had bought at auction for our 25th anniversary, a painting now worth over $100,000. The not-so-subtle questions about my retirement plans. The suggestion that I might be working too hard for a man your age, despite my perfect health. 2 weeks ago, I had stopped by their house unexpectedly to drop off some old photos I'd found of David as a child. Jennifer hadn't heard me come in. David had given me a key years ago. I found her in David's home office, photographing documents from my most recent financial portfolio review that David had brought home to look over for me. When she saw me, she'd laughed it off. "Just trying to learn more about the family business," she'd said. "David's always saying I should take more interest." I'd nodded and smiled, but something cold had settled in my stomach. My son had married a stranger, and I suddenly wasn't sure I knew who she really was. "Dad? Everything okay?" David's voice pulled me back to the present as I exited the bathroom. My son stood in the hallway of Lorenzo's, the upscale Italian restaurant where we were having our family dinner. His face showed genuine concern, the same expression he'd had since boyhood when something troubled him. "Just taking a moment," I said, patting his shoulder. "Big night, talking about the will and all. We don't have to do this now if you're not feeling up to it," he said, and I could see he meant it. David had never been interested in my money, only in earning his own way and making me proud, which he had done countless times over. No, it's important we all understand how things will work. Transparency prevents problems down the road. As we walked back to the table, I observed Jennifer from across the room. Her smile widened at our approach, but her eyes remained calculating, flicking between my still full wineglass and my face. "Everything all right, Baxter?" she asked with practiced concern. "Never better," I replied, taking my seat, "though I think I'll stick with water tonight. The medication my doctor put me on last week doesn't mix well with alcohol." I watched as something flashed behind her eyes. Frustration, perhaps? Or recalculation? She recovered quickly, reaching for my wineglass. "No sense letting good wine go to waste," she said smoothly, moving my glass toward her empty one. I placed my hand over hers, stopping the movement. "Actually, I insist you keep your glass. This one was poured specially for me. A vintage the owner knows I appreciate." The tension between us was subtle but unmistakable. David, focused on the menu, missed it entirely. "So, Dad," he said, "you mentioned changes to your will? Is everything okay health-wise that we should know about?" Before I could answer, Jennifer's hand slipped to his knee under the table, a gesture I wasn't meant to see. "Darling, let your father enjoy his dinner before getting into all that. I'm sure if there were any serious health concerns, he would have told us immediately." Her emphasis on the word immediately sent a chill down my spine. What had she been planning, and for how long? And more importantly, who was the waitress who had warned me? And how did she know? Over the next few weeks, I maintained a careful facade of normalcy while privately launching my own investigation. The waitress had disappeared after that night. When I'd asked the restaurant manager about her, he'd claimed no knowledge of anyone fitting her description on staff. My longtime friend and doctor, Samuel Washburn, listened patiently as I explained my suspicions in his office, careful to keep my voice low despite the closed door. "Bax, that's a serious accusation," Sam said, running a hand through his silver hair. "We'd been friends since college, and he'd been my physician for over 30 years. Are you certain you're not just being protective of David?" A lot of fathers have trouble with daughters-in-law. "This isn't about Jennifer not being good enough for my son," I insisted. "This is about unexplained symptoms I've been having after Sunday dinners at their house. The headaches, the memory fog, the stomach issues. And now this waitress warning me not to drink something Jennifer tampered with." Sam frowned, flipping through my recent lab results. "Your last few blood tests have shown some unusual markers. Nothing definitively problematic, but atypical for someone with your otherwise excellent health. I assumed it might be stress from running the company." "Could it be poison?" I asked bluntly. His eyes widened. "Poison is a strong word, Bax. Strong words for strong suspicions," I replied. "Can you run more specific tests? Check for substances that might not show up in standard blood work?" Sam agreed reluctantly, drawing several vials of blood and promising to send them to a specialized toxicology lab. I left his office with a prescription for antacids, our cover story for the visit, and a growing sense of unease. That Sunday, I arrived at David and Jennifer's suburban home for our standing dinner date with a new awareness. Their house was large but tasteful, purchased with a down payment I'd gifted them for their wedding. David had insisted on taking out a mortgage for the remainder, wanting to make his own way as he always had. Jennifer greeted me at the door, immaculate in a casual but clearly expensive outfit. "Baxter, right on time as always," she said, kissing my cheek. I noticed she watched carefully as I hung my coat in the entryway closet. When I pulled out a bottle of wine I'd brought, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "You shouldn't have," she said. "I've already decanted a special bottle for dinner." "Then save this one for another occasion," I replied easily. David emerged from the kitchen in an apron, wooden spoon in hand. My son had discovered a love of cooking after Laura died, a therapeutic hobby that had blossomed into genuine talent. "Dad, come taste this sauce and tell me if it needs more basil." I followed him into the kitchen, aware of Jennifer trailing behind us. David offered me a small spoonful of his marinara, and I made a show of savoring it. "Perfect as is," I declared. "Your mother would be proud of how you've mastered her recipe." David beamed at the mention of Mary. Jennifer's smile remained fixed as she moved to the refrigerator. "Let me pour you some water, Baxter. Or would you prefer to start with wine?" "Water is fine for now," I said, noticing how she positioned herself between me and the glass as she filled it from a pitcher. Throughout dinner I pretended to eat and drink while actually consuming very little, claiming a slight stomach upset. I observed how Jennifer kept steering the conversation toward my company's upcoming projects and recent land acquisitions. "That property by the lakefront must have been quite expensive," she commented. "Real estate values in that area have skyrocketed." "A calculated risk," I replied vaguely. "The company has weathered riskier ventures." "Speaking of risks," Jennifer said, refilling my water glass unasked, "David and I were talking about your living situation. That big house all to yourself since Mary passed. It must be so lonely and difficult to maintain." David looked surprised. "We were?" Jennifer shot him a quick look before continuing smoothly. "Remember, honey? We discussed how there are some lovely assisted living communities that offer independence, but with support staff nearby." "Dad doesn't need assisted living," David said, frowning. "He's in better shape than I am." Jennifer patted his hand condescendingly. "Of course he is now, but it's better to look into these options before they're needed, especially with his memory lapses lately." I set down my fork. "Memory lapses? You forgot our lunch date last Tuesday," Jennifer said with exaggerated concern. "And last month, you couldn't remember the name of David's college roommate when we bumped into him at the grocery store." "I never had a lunch date with you last Tuesday," I said firmly. "I was in meetings all day, and I absolutely remembered Todd Brennan's name when we saw him." I asked about his brother Michael, who'd been ill. The tension in the room thickened. David looked between us, confused. Dad's right, Jen. He never forgets details like that. Jennifer recovered quickly, laughing lightly. Well, perhaps I'm mistaken about the lunch date, and maybe I misheard the conversation with Todd. Forgive me, Baxter. After dinner, while Jennifer cleared the dishes, David showed me photos from their recent weekend trip to the coast. As we flipped through his phone gallery, an older photo appeared. Jennifer standing next to an elderly man in what looked like a nursing home garden. "Who's that?" I asked casually. "Oh, that's Walter Simmons," David said. "Jennifer worked as his caretaker before we met. She was very fond of him." I made a mental note of the name as Jennifer returned, quickly glancing at the phone screen. "Showing old photos, are we?" she asked lightly, though I caught the hint of annoyance in her voice. "Walter was such a dear. He left me a small inheritance when he passed. Said I was like the daughter he never had." "How generous," I remarked. "Was that common in your line of work?" "Not at all," she replied, taking the phone from David's hands and closing the photo app. "Walter was special." That night, after declining dessert and making my escape, I called Patricia Winters, my attorney of 20 years. "I need you to look into someone's background very discreetly," I told her. "And I think it's time we revisited my will." The following morning, Sam called with my test results. "Bax," he said, his voice grave, "you need to come in. There are compounds in your system that shouldn't be there. Low doses, but consistent with certain tasteless, odorless substances that can cause gradual organ damage over time." A cold certainty settled in my gut. Someone's been poisoning me. "It appears that way," Sam confirmed. "And if you've been experiencing symptoms after regular meals at your son's house, then I know exactly who's responsible," I finished. I hired Julian Morris, a former police detective turned private investigator, on Patricia's recommendation. His office was small but meticulously organized, much like the man himself. "Mr. Reynolds," Julian said after I explained my situation, "what you're describing is methodical elder abuse and attempted murder. If your daughter-in-law is behind this, we need concrete proof before approaching authorities." "I understand," I said. "Money is no object. I need to protect my son as much as myself." Over the next month, Julian compiled a disturbing dossier on Jennifer Clark Reynolds. Born Jennifer Lee Adams in a small town 300 miles north, she had changed her name after high school. She'd moved frequently, working primarily in elder care facilities and as a private nurse. Most disturbingly, she had been married twice before David. Information she had concealed from both of us. Her first husband, Robert Clark, a retired investment banker 30 years her senior, had died of natural causes 18 months after their wedding, leaving her a substantial inheritance. Her second marriage to George Hoffman, a widowed real estate developer in his 60s, had ended with his death just 14 months after their wedding. Another case of unexpected health complications. Neither death triggered investigations, Julian explained, spreading photographs across his desk. Both men were older, with some existing health conditions. Their declines appeared gradual and unremarkable to outsiders. But suspicious in retrospect, I noted, examining a newspaper clipping about George Hoffman's funeral, where Jennifer, looking appropriately bereaved, was mentioned as his devoted wife. Julian nodded. "I've also been tracking her current activities. She meets regularly with this man." He showed me surveillance photos of Jennifer in a park, speaking with a thin, nervous-looking man in his 40s. Curtis Whitaker, former lab technician with a history of prescription drug theft. He now works at a chemical supply company. My stomach tightened, supplying her with whatever she's been putting in my food and drinks. "Most likely," Julian agreed. "They're careful, brief meetings in public places, minimal visible exchanges. But my source at the chemical company confirms Whitaker has access to various compounds that would match what your doctor found in your system." The most painful revelation came when Julian uncovered evidence suggesting Jennifer might have played a role in Laura's fatal car accident. Phone records showed multiple calls between Jennifer and Laura in the weeks before the crash, though David had never mentioned them knowing each other. "They were reportedly seen arguing at a coffee shop 2 days before the accident," Julian said gently. "And the brake line damage on Laura's car was ruled accidental, but could have been deliberately caused." I sat back, momentarily overwhelmed. She targeted my son from the beginning. "It appears so," Julian confirmed. "And now that she's married to him, your estate is the next objective. Has she been pushing for any changes in your legal affairs?" "Increasingly," I said. She's suggested several times that David should have power of attorney just in case, claiming she's worried about my mental capacity. Julian's expression darkened. That's textbook. First isolation, then medical gaslighting, then legal control. Once she has power of attorney, your assets become accessible, and any further decline in your health won't raise suspicions. She's done this before, I realized. Walter Simmons, the man she cared for, and probably others we don't know about yet. I'm still digging into Simmons' death, Julian said, but preliminary findings suggest a similar pattern. I stood up, a plan forming in my mind. I need to force her hand. Create a situation where she reveals herself, but on my terms, where I control the variables. That's extremely risky, Mr. Reynolds. So, is waiting for her to succeed in killing me, I countered. And I need to open my son's eyes to who he really married. Julian reluctantly helped me formulate a strategy centered around a family dinner where I would announce changes to my will. We needed witnesses, evidence, and perfect timing. That evening, I visited David at his office. My son had worked his way up from site manager to executive vice president of Reynolds Construction through pure merit and determination. His corner office overlooked our latest commercial project downtown. "Dad, this is a surprise," he said, embracing me warmly. "Everything okay?" I settled into a chair across from his desk. "I've been doing some estate planning. At my age, it's important to have everything in order." David frowned. "You're in perfect health. This isn't because of Jennifer's assisted living comments, is it?" I told her that was inappropriate. "Actually, I'd like to have dinner with both of you next week to discuss my plans. Somewhere nice. How about Lorenzo's, where we had that family dinner last month?" "Sure," David said, "but you know I've never cared about the inheritance stuff. The company, the money, that's all yours, Dad. I've always wanted to make my own way." My heart swelled with pride. David had always been like that. Honest, hardworking, independent. So different from the calculating woman he had married. "I know, son. But transparency prevents problems. I'd like Patricia to join us as well. You remember my attorney?" David looked surprised. "Sounds serious." "Just thorough," I assured him. "I've worked too hard building this legacy to leave anything to chance." As I left his office, I received a text from Julian. "Whitaker purchased insulin and digitalis compound yesterday. Untraceable in standard tox screens unless specifically tested for. Be extremely careful." I texted back a single word. Understood. That night, I called Lorenzo's to make a reservation for the following Thursday. I asked for a specific table, one visible from multiple angles of the restaurant, where conversation could be overheard by nearby diners who might serve as potential witnesses. I also requested their security footage from our previous dinner, claiming I thought I might have left an expensive pen behind. The manager, recognizing me as a regular customer, agreed to let me view the recordings. The footage confirmed my suspicions. In a brief moment when both David and I were distracted by the waiter presenting specials, Jennifer clearly slipped something from her purse into my wine glass, her movements quick and practiced. I forwarded the footage to Julian and Patricia, building our case methodically. Patricia called me immediately after receiving it. "Baxter, this is deeply disturbing. We should take this to the police now." "Not yet," I insisted. She'd deny everything, claim it was medication I'd asked her to add, or a sugar substitute. We need her to reveal more, to make her intentions unmistakable to David and any witnesses present. "You're using yourself as bait," Patricia warned. "That's incredibly dangerous." "I'll be careful," I promised, "and I won't be alone." As Thursday approached, I made one final discovery that cemented my resolve. Julian had located Walter Simmons' former housekeeper, who revealed that Walter had changed his will just 2 weeks before his death, leaving Jennifer $80,000 and a valuable coin collection, far more than a typical bequest to a caretaker. The changes had been made after Jennifer told him his estranged daughter was attempting to seize control of his assets. His daughter knew nothing about these accusations, Julian reported. She'd been trying to reconcile with her father when Jennifer came into the picture, and suddenly all communication was cut off. A familiar pattern of isolation, manipulation, and financial exploitation. One Jennifer had refined with each victim, including now, potentially, me. Thursday evening arrived, and I prepared myself for a confrontation 3 years in the making. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the one Mary had always said brought out the determination in my eyes. In my pocket I carried an audio recorder Julian had provided, already activated. As I drove to Lorenzo's, I thought about David, my kind, trusting son, who deserved far better than the predator who had targeted him in his grief. Tonight would be painful for him, but necessary. Sometimes, the truth hurts before it heals. Lorenzo's was elegant as always, with soft lighting and the gentle murmur of conversations creating an intimate atmosphere. I arrived early to confirm arrangements with the staff and to center myself before the performance of a lifetime. I had reserved a corner table with a clear view of the entire restaurant. Patricia arrived next, professional in a navy suit, legal documents tucked discreetly in her leather portfolio. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" she asked quietly as we waited. "I've never been more certain of anything," I replied. "She's dangerous, Patricia. To me, to David, potentially to others if we don't stop her." David and Jennifer arrived precisely on time. My son embraced me warmly, while Jennifer air-kissed my cheek, her perfume expensive and cloying. "Baxter, you look wonderful," she gushed, her eyes quickly scanning my face for any signs of the declining health she had been fabricating. "Though perhaps a little tired around the eyes?" "Never felt better," I replied pleasantly. Jennifer's gaze shifted to Patricia, confusion briefly flickering across her features. "I don't believe we've met." "Patricia Winters," my attorney said coolly, offering a brief handshake. "I handle Baxter's legal affairs." Jennifer's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "How nice. Baxter didn't mention we'd have company tonight." "Legal matters benefit from professional oversight," I said as we took our seats. "Patricia has managed my estate planning for 20 years. David looked between us, sensing tension but not understanding its source. "Dad mentioned he wanted to discuss his will," he explained to Jennifer. "Though I told him it's really not necessary." "On the contrary," Jennifer said, reaching for his hand. "Your father's legacy is important, and we should all be clear on his wishes." Her eyes gleamed with barely concealed interest. A server approached to take our drink orders. I requested a bottle of Chateau Margaux, a rare vintage the restaurant had been saving for a special occasion. "A $2,000 wine?" David asked, surprised. "What exactly are we celebrating?" "Clarity," I replied simply. As we perused menus, I noticed Jennifer scanning the restaurant periodically, her attention lingering on a server I didn't recognize, a thin man who seemed to be watching our table with unusual interest. When our wine arrived, the sommelier made a show of presenting the bottle before pouring. Jennifer suggested helpfully, "Let me make sure everyone gets the perfect pour," reaching for the bottle. "The sommelier is quite capable," I interjected smoothly. The wine was poured, and we raised our glasses in a toast. I noticed Jennifer watching intently as I lifted mine to my lips but only pretended to sip. "Now," I said, setting down my glass, "about the changes to my will." Jennifer leaned forward slightly, her interest palpable. "Changes? You're not planning to donate everything to charity, are you, Baxter?" She laughed, but her eyes remained calculating. "Not everything," I replied. "Though I've established several charitable trusts, the bulk of my estate, the company, properties, investments, will pass to David, of course." "Of course," she echoed, relaxing slightly. "With conditions," I added. Her smile froze. "Conditions?" I nodded. "Given certain concerns about financial management and potential elder abuse situations I've observed in my social circle, I've established a robust set of protections." David looked confused. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "I'm creating an irrevocable trust with independent trustees who must verify my competency and ensure no undue influence if any changes are requested," I explained. "Additionally, there are specific clauses regarding any spouse marrying into the family within 5 years of a previous spouse's death." Jennifer's knuckles whitened around her wine glass. "That seems unnecessarily complicated." "Not at all," Patricia interjected, opening her portfolio. "It's becoming standard practice in high-net-worth estate planning. We've also included provisions regarding any suspicious deaths within the family." "Suspicious deaths?" David repeated, looking increasingly bewildered. "Dad, where is this coming from?" I was about to respond when I noticed a waitress approaching our table, a young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place her. She leaned down as if adjusting our table setting and whispered urgently, "Mr. Reynolds, do not drink the wine. She's working with someone on staff." Before I could react, she slipped a folded napkin beside my plate and moved away quickly. Jennifer was distracted by the sommelier refilling her glass and hadn't noticed the exchange. I casually unfolded the napkin under the table. The note read, "I'm Eliza Hoffman, George's daughter. She killed my father. Your wine has been tampered with. Switch glasses when you can." My blood ran cold. Julian had mentioned George Hoffman had a daughter from his first marriage, but we hadn't been able to locate her. Somehow, she had found me instead. I excused myself to use the restroom, taking the moment to compose myself. When I returned, I noticed Jennifer had moved my wine glass closer to my place setting, her eyes tracking me expectantly. "Before we continue," I said, reaching for my water instead of the wine, "I'd like to ask Jennifer something." Her smile remained fixed. "Of course, Baxter, anything. How well did you know Laura before the accident?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. David went completely still. Jennifer's facade cracked for just an instant before she recovered. "Laura? I never met David's first wife. She died before David and I met." Her voice was steady, but a slight flush had crept up her neck. "That's interesting," I said, "because I have phone records showing multiple calls between you in the weeks before her accident, and a witness who saw you arguing at Riverside Coffee just 2 days before she died." David turned to Jennifer, his face ashen. "Is this true? You told me you didn't know Laura." "This is absurd," Jennifer said, her voice rising slightly. "Baxter must be confused. Perhaps this is why we've been concerned about his memory issues." "My memory is perfectly intact," I said calmly. "As are the phone records Patricia has compiled." Jennifer's eyes darted between us, calculating her next move. "Even if we did speak, it was probably about a charity event or something. I would have mentioned it if I thought it was important." While David was focused on Jennifer, I smoothly switched our wine glasses, placing hers in front of me and mine in front of her. "I think we should all take a moment to collect ourselves," I suggested, lifting Jennifer's wine glass. "A toast to honesty and family." Jennifer watched, barely concealing her anticipation as I raised the glass to my lips. She quickly lifted her own glass, my untampered wine, and took a generous swallow. "To family," she echoed, a triumphant gleam in her eyes as she watched me over the rim of her glass. I set the glass down without drinking. "Tell me, Jennifer, how many others were there before David? How many wealthy, vulnerable men did you target?" Her smile faltered. "I don't know what you're implying. Robert Clark, your first husband. George Hoffman, your second. Walter Simmons, who left you a surprising inheritance for a mere caretaker. All older men. All dead within 2 years of you entering their lives." David stared at his wife in growing horror. "You were married before? You told me you'd never found the right person until me." Jennifer's composure began to crack. "These are vicious lies," she hissed, but her hands were trembling. She took another large swallow of wine, my untampered wine, as if to steady herself. "I have documentation for everything," I said quietly. "Death certificates, marriage licenses, financial transfers, all showing the same pattern." "David, don't listen to him," Jennifer pleaded, reaching for my son's hand. He pulled away, staring at her as if seeing a stranger. "Your father is confused, maybe even paranoid. We've noticed his behavior changing lately, remember? The only thing I've noticed," David said slowly, "is that my health issues always seem to flare up after meals you prepared." Jennifer's face paled. She took another drink, then frowned, blinking rapidly. "I don't feel right," she murmured. "That's concerning," I said evenly, "especially since we switched wine glasses while you were distracted." Her eyes widened in shock, darting to the glass in her hand, the one she had originally placed in front of me. "What did you put in my wine, Jennifer?" I asked, as Patricia discreetly signaled to the restaurant manager. Jennifer stood abruptly, swaying slightly. "This is insane. I'm leaving." She grabbed her purse but stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the table. "Are you all right, Miss Clark? Or is it Miss Adams? Or Mrs. Hoffman?" I asked, using all her different identities. Her eyes narrowed with sudden hatred. "You think you're so clever, don't you? So much better than everyone with your perfect company and perfect family." David stood as well, his face a mask of pain. "Jen, what did you do?" "What I had to do," she snapped, her composure crumbling entirely. "Laura was in the way, acting like she owned you, like your father's money would never be ours." The restaurant had gone silent, other diners watching the unfolding drama. David staggered back as if physically struck. You knew Laura? You had something to do with her accident?" Jennifer swayed more pronouncedly, the substance she'd put in my wine beginning to affect her. Accident, she laughed bitterly. Brake lines are so fragile. One little cut and down the hill she went. David's face drained of all color. Patricia was already on the phone, summoning police. The manager and several staff members had moved closer, blocking the exits. All I wanted was what I deserved, Jennifer continued, her words slurring slightly. A comfortable life. Security. Is that so wrong? These rich men just hoard their money, making everyone else jump through hoops. She turned to me, hatred blazing in her eyes despite her increasing disorientation. You were supposed to be easy. Old man living alone, estranged from his son. I just needed to get close enough. Gain David's trust. But you wouldn't die. The pills, the powders, nothing worked. Because I've been onto you for months, I said quietly. Every meal at your house, I only pretended to eat what you prepared. Every drink, disposed of when you weren't looking. Jennifer lunged for her purse again, but I was faster, sliding it away. Looking for your phone? To warn Curtis that things have gone wrong? At the mention of her accomplice's name, panic flashed across her face. She suddenly clutched at her throat, genuinely frightened now. What's happening to me? What was in that wine? Whatever you put there, I answered calmly. Don't worry, I've already arranged for medical attention. Unlike you, I don't want anyone to die. As if on cue, paramedics entered the restaurant, followed closely by police officers. The waitress, Eliza Hoffman, was speaking with one of them, gesturing toward our table. Jennifer collapsed back into her chair, the fight leaving her as quickly as it had come. David, she pleaded weakly, reaching for my son. David stepped away, tears streaming down his face. I don't know who you are, he whispered. As the paramedics reached our table, Jennifer's eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward. In the chaos that followed, her being placed on a stretcher, police securing the scene, witnesses giving statements, I moved to my son's side and put my arm around his shoulders. I'm so sorry, I said softly. I didn't want to believe it either at first. David looked at me, devastation written across his features. How long have you known? Suspected for months. Known for certain? A few weeks. I needed proof you couldn't deny. He nodded mutely, watching as Jennifer was carried from the restaurant, an officer accompanying her to the hospital where she would be both treated and guarded. I loved her, Dad, he said, his voice breaking. I really loved her. I know, son. I held him tighter. I know. The following days passed in a blur of police interviews, evidence processing, and painful revelations. Jennifer had been stabilized at the hospital. The substance in the wine identified as a combination of insulin and digitalis that, in the right dose, would have caused a heart attack easily mistaken as natural in a man my age. David withdrew into himself initially, taking a leave of absence from work as he processed the betrayal. I gave him space while ensuring he wasn't alone, staying at his house and arranging for trusted friends to be with him when I couldn't be. 1 week after the restaurant confrontation, we sat together on his back porch, watching the sunset. The police had called earlier to inform us that Jennifer was being charged with attempted murder, along with a growing list of other crimes as investigations into her past deepened. They found Laura's brake line fragments in a box in Jennifer's storage unit, David said quietly, breaking a long silence, along with trophies from her other victims. Watches, cufflinks, wedding rings. I nodded, having already been briefed by the detective in charge. Some people collect memories of those they've loved, others of those they've destroyed. David stared into his untouched glass of bourbon. I keep trying to find the moment I should have known. Some sign I missed. She was practiced at deception, son. She'd been perfecting her approach for years. But I brought her into our family, he said, his voice cracking. I gave her access to you. If she had succeeded, but she didn't, I reminded him gently. And now she can't hurt anyone else. David looked at me, his eyes haunted. They found journals, Dad, detailed plans about how she would eliminate you, calculations of how much money she expected to inherit through me, contingencies for if I became inconvenient once she had control of the assets. I felt a chill despite the warm evening. She underestimated both of us. No, she underestimated you, David corrected. I was completely blind. You were grieving, I said. Grief makes us vulnerable. She exploited that, just as she exploited Walter Simmons' estrangement from his daughter and George Hoffman's loneliness after his wife died. David shook his head, still struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the calculating predator revealed in police reports and evidence files. "How did that waitress know?" he asked. "Eliza Hoffman?" "She'd been tracking Jennifer for 2 years, trying to prove her father hadn't died of natural causes," I explained. "When she saw Jennifer's photo in the society pages after your wedding, she recognized her immediately. She'd been gathering evidence, but didn't have enough for the police to act. When she learned Jennifer was married to the son of a wealthy businessman, she feared history repeating itself. So she got a job at Lorenzo's to watch us?" I nodded. "She'd been working there only 2 weeks when we had our first dinner there. She recognized Jennifer and noticed her tampering with my drink. That's when she warned me." "Thank God she did," David murmured. "Afterward, she contacted Julian, my investigator. Their combined evidence was crucial in building the case." We lapsed into silence again, both processing the enormity of what had happened and what had nearly happened. The sky darkened from orange to deep purple, stars beginning to appear. "Dad," David said finally, "I need to tell you something about that night at the restaurant." "What's that?" "When Jennifer started talking about Laura, about causing her accident, I thought my heart would stop. But in that terrible moment, I also felt relief." He looked at me, guilt written across his features. Relief that I hadn't imagined the brake problems, that the investigators who called it an accident hadn't missed something I could have fixed. I reached over and gripped his shoulder. "You've carried that burden for 3 years, thinking you might have overlooked something that could have saved her." David nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I went over every detail of her car's maintenance 1,000 times in my head, wondering if I'd missed something. Now I know why the brake line failed, and it had nothing to do with me." "That knowledge doesn't erase the pain of losing Laura," I said gently, "but perhaps it can help you forgive yourself for something that was never your fault." A police car pulled into the driveway, and Detective Morgan approached the porch. He'd been leading the investigation, a methodical, compassionate officer who had handled both the evidence and our family's trauma with equal care. "Evening, Mr. Reynolds." "David," he greeted us, declining the offered seat. "I wanted to update you personally rather than over the phone." "We appreciate that," I said. "What's happened?" "Jennifer Clark, or Adams, or whatever name she's currently using, has been formally charged with attempted murder, evidence tampering, identity fraud, and a host of other charges." He paused, his expression grave. "During questioning, she's implicated Curtis Whitaker in not only your poisoning attempt but also 3 other deaths, including Laura's." David inhaled sharply. "Whitaker has agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence," the detective continued. "His testimony, combined with the physical evidence we've recovered and Jennifer's own incriminating statements at the restaurant, makes for an extremely strong case." "Will there be a trial?" I asked. Her attorney is already discussing plea options. With the mountain of evidence against her, they're likely trying to avoid a trial that would expose the full extent of her crimes. Detective Morgan looked at David compassionately. "She'll be spending many decades in prison, regardless of whether there's a trial." After he left, promising to keep us informed of any developments, David and I remained on the porch, the weight of finality settling over us. "It's really over," David said quietly. "The immediate danger, yes, I agreed. The healing will take longer. Do you think we can ever go back to normal?" I considered this thoughtfully. "I don't think we go back, son. We go forward, carrying what we've learned, both the painful and the valuable lessons." David nodded slowly. "Like what you did at the restaurant, trusting your instincts even when everyone else might have called you paranoid. And like what you're doing now," I added. "Finding the strength to face truth, however painful." As stars filled the night sky, we sat together in silence, father and son united by trauma but also by resilience, beginning the long process of rebuilding what Jennifer had nearly destroyed. 3 months passed. Autumn leaves gave way to winter frost as the legal proceedings against Jennifer moved forward with the inexorable pace of justice. She had eventually accepted a plea deal, confessing to multiple counts of fraud, attempted murder, and second-degree murder in Laura's death. The sentence: 80 years without possibility of parole. The morning of her sentencing, David and I had sat together in the courthouse, listening as the judge delivered a scathing assessment of Jennifer's calculated predation of vulnerable individuals and extraordinary moral depravity. Jennifer had stared straight ahead, showing no remorse, occasionally glancing at David with an expression that chilled my blood, not hatred, but something closer to possessive frustration, as if he were simply an asset she'd failed to properly leverage. As winter deepened, David began the process of divorce, though it was largely a formality given Jennifer's incarceration. The psychological divorce, separating himself from the memories and manipulation, proved far more challenging. He started seeing a therapist specializing in betrayal trauma, gradually working through the complex tangle of grief, guilt, and anger. I had my own healing to do. Though I'd escaped Jennifer's murderous plot, the violation of trust and the knowledge that someone had systematically attempted to poison me left invisible scars. I found myself hesitating before meals in restaurants, instinctively checking for signs of tampering, startling at unexpected movements from servers. One snowy December afternoon, David stopped by my office at Reynolds Construction. Since the truth about Jennifer had come to light, he had thrown himself back into work with renewed focus, as if the company's concrete problems provided relief from the ambiguities of emotional recovery. "Got a minute, Dad?" he asked, leaning in my doorway. "Always," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. He sat down, looking more at peace than I'd seen him in months. "I've been thinking about what happened, about Jennifer and her plan." I nodded encouragingly, letting him lead the conversation. "She wasn't just after money," he said thoughtfully. "That was part of it, but I think what really drove her was control. Each victim gave her not just financial gain, but the thrill of holding power over life and death." "That fits with what the psychiatrist testified," I agreed. "A malignant narcissist with sociopathic tendencies." David leaned forward, his expression earnest. "But here's what I realized. Her weakness was the same as her strength. Her need for absolute control made her predictable in some ways. Once you suspected her, you could anticipate how she'd react. Like setting up the dinner at Lorenzo's," I said, understanding where he was going. "Exactly. You created a situation where her desire to control the outcome, your death, made her vulnerable to being exposed." I smiled slightly, impressed by my son's insight. In attempting to play puppet master, she failed to see that others might be pulling strings as well. "Which brings me to why I'm here," David continued. "I've been reviewing the company's security protocols and governance structures. Jennifer got close to our family, but she never managed to access the company's core assets or operations. The company has always had multiple layers of protection," I acknowledged. "Mary insisted on that from the beginning." "Mom was wise," David said, smiling at the mention of his mother. "But I think we can do even better. I've drafted some proposals to strengthen our safeguards against potential bad actors, not just external threats, but anyone who might try to manipulate their way into positions of influence." He handed me a folder containing detailed recommendations for enhanced background checks, accountability structures, and transparency mechanisms. I flipped through it, impressed by the thoroughness. "This is excellent work, David," I said sincerely. He hesitated, then added, "There's something else. Patricia contacted me yesterday about the Walter Simmons case. The police have officially reopened the investigation into his death, and his daughter Eliza is finally getting the answers she sought for so long. That's good news. Eliza deserves closure. Jennifer's other victims are being re-examined too. Robert Clark's son is working with authorities to exhume his father's body for toxicology testing." I set down the folder, studying my son's face. Though the pain was still visible in his eyes, there was also a new strength there, a hardness that hadn't existed before Jennifer entered our lives. "Justice matters," I said quietly. "Not just for us, but for all those she harmed." David nodded. "That's why I'm establishing a foundation in Laura's name. It will fund resources for families affected by suspicious deaths and advocate for more rigorous investigations in cases involving elderly individuals or those with valuable estates." Pride swelled in my chest. Even in his darkest moment, my son was thinking of others, finding purpose in preventing future tragedies like ours. "Laura would be proud," I said, "as am I." A comfortable silence settled between us, the kind that only exists between people who have weathered a storm together and emerged, changed but intact. "There's one more thing," David said eventually. Curtis Whitaker provided details about Jennifer's network, other enablers who helped her target victims and cover her tracks. "The FBI is involved now, investigating what may be a broader elder exploitation ring. Turning over stones often reveals more snakes," I observed. "Exactly. And that's why I'd like to continue working with Julian Morris. His investigative skills were crucial in exposing Jennifer, and there may be others out there using similar methods." I agreed immediately. Julian's thorough work had likely saved my life and helped bring Jennifer to justice. Using those same skills to protect other potential victims seemed a fitting extension of our own hard-won victory. As David rose to leave, something occurred to me. "Son, whatever happened to that waitress who warned me? Eliza Hoffman?" David's expression softened. "She's working with the foundation, actually. Her experience trying to prove what happened to her father gives her unique insight into the challenges families face in these situations. Invite her to dinner," I suggested. "A proper dinner this time, without poisoned wine. I'd like to thank her properly." David agreed, and as he left my office, I found myself reflecting on how differently things might have ended without Eliza's warning, without my own suspicions, without the team of allies who had helped expose Jennifer's deadly intentions. That evening, as I returned to my empty house, the home I'd shared with Mary for 40 years, I paused in the entryway, surveying the familiar surroundings with new appreciation. Jennifer had coveted this place, had seen it only as a symbol of wealth to be acquired. She had never understood that its true value lay in the memories it contained, the love that had built it piece by piece over decades. I moved to the mantelpiece, picking up a framed photo of Mary, David, and me on our son's college graduation day. Mary's eyes sparkled with pride, her hand resting protectively on David's shoulder. "You would have seen through her immediately," I told Mary's smiling image. "You always could read people better than I could." The house felt different now, not just a repository of past happiness, but a sanctuary preserved from those who would have destroyed our family's legacy. In trying to take everything from us, Jennifer had inadvertently strengthened the bonds she sought to exploit. As snow fell gently outside the windows, I made a silent promise to honor that unexpected gift by using what remained of my life to protect others from predators like Jennifer, through the foundation David was creating, through changes to company policy, through sharing our story when it might help others recognize the warning signs we had initially missed. The greatest revenge against someone who sought to end your story is to ensure it continues, stronger and more meaningful than before. Jennifer had failed not just in her attempt to kill me, but in her fundamental misunderstanding of what truly constitutes wealth. Not money or property, but the connections between people who genuinely care for one another. In that moment, despite everything we had endured, I felt truly rich beyond measure. Spring arrived with a gentle persistence, melting winter's grip and coaxing new growth from soil that had seemed frozen beyond recovery. 6 months had passed since the night at Lorenzo's, and life had settled into new patterns, different from before, but increasingly comfortable. David had finalized his divorce and thrown himself into establishing the Laura Reynolds Foundation for Elder Justice. What had begun as a personal mission had quickly gained national attention, revealing the scope of exploitation targeting vulnerable seniors across the country. He had assembled an impressive board of directors, including medical experts, legal advocates, and family members of victims like Eliza Hoffman, whose first-hand experience proved invaluable in developing practical support systems. The Foundation's first major initiative, a guide helping families identify warning signs of predatory relationships, had already been distributed to medical offices and senior centers nationwide. David spoke at conferences, sharing our family's story with a candor that inspired others to come forward with their own experiences. I had officially begun transitioning leadership of Reynolds Construction to David, though I remained active as chairman of the board. The company had weathered the publicity surrounding Jennifer's crimes remarkably well, perhaps because our transparency about the situation had generated sympathy rather than suspicion. On a particularly beautiful April morning, I arrived at the office to find an unexpected visitor waiting in reception. Detective Morgan, now promoted to lieutenant, looking more relaxed than during our previous encounters. "Mr. Reynolds," he greeted me warmly. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "Of course," I replied, leading him to my office. "Is there news about the case?" "Actually, yes," he said once we were seated. "The federal investigation has made significant progress. Curtis Whitaker's cooperation opened doors to a network operating across 3 states, targeting wealthy, elderly individuals through various means: caregiving, romantic relationships, financial advising. Like Jennifer, I noted. She appears to have been one of their more successful operators, though somewhat independent. The network provided resources, identities, and sometimes technical assistance like Whitaker's chemical compounds, but each member had their own methods. I absorbed this information, disturbed by the organized nature of what I'd assumed was Jennifer's individual pathology. How many victims? Confirmed? 27 over the past decade. Suspected? Possibly over 100. Lieutenant Morgan's expression was grim. Many cases were written off as natural deaths or accidents, particularly when family members raised no suspicions. Because the predators isolated their victims first, I said, remembering how Jennifer had attempted to create distance between David and me. He nodded. Exactly. The foundation your son established? It's already making a difference. 3 families have come forward after reading the warning signs document, leading to arrests in 2 ongoing exploitation cases. Pride warmed my chest. David would be pleased to hear that. I thought you might like to share the news with him yourself, Lieutenant Morgan said, standing to leave. And there's one more thing. Eliza Hoffman asked me to give you this. He handed me a small envelope before departing. Inside was a simple card containing a photograph of a distinguished-looking older man with kind eyes, George Hoffman, Eliza's father, and a handwritten note. Justice takes many forms. Thank you for helping me find mine. Later that day, I invited David to lunch at a small cafe near the office, sharing Lieutenant Morgan's update and Eliza's note. 100 potential victims, David said quietly, shaking his head. And those are just the ones connected to this particular network. Which makes the Foundation's work all the more important, I pointed out. You're creating something meaningful from tragedy, son, a legacy Laura would be proud of. David smiled slightly, his grief still present but no longer all-consuming. I've been thinking about legacies lately, about what we leave behind and how we choose to use the time we have. Oh? I prompted, sensing he had something specific on his mind. I'm considering adopting, he said, meeting my eyes directly. A 10-year-old boy named Michael. His parents died in a house fire last year, and he's had trouble finding a permanent placement because of his age. Surprise and joy mingled in my response. You've always been wonderful with children. I've been volunteering at the Children's Center for a few months, David explained. Michael and I connected right away. He's bright, resilient, reminds me a bit of myself at that age. Too serious sometimes, carrying more weight than a child should have to bear. When can I meet him? I asked, not bothering to hide my enthusiasm. David laughed, relief evident in his expression. I was hoping you'd say that. He's asked about you actually. Seems impressed that my dad caught a real criminal like on TV. Happy to live up to the legend, I said, chuckling, though I had plenty of help. As we finished lunch, David grew more serious again. I wanted to tell you something else, Dad. I've been visiting Laura's grave regularly since Jennifer's conviction. Last week, I felt ready to say a real goodbye. I reached across the table, squeezing his hand briefly. Not goodbye, perhaps. Just acknowledgement that love changes form, not substance. That's exactly it, David said, looking surprised. I'll always love her, but I'm finally ready to build a future that isn't defined by loss. That's all any parent wants for their child, I told him. The capacity to heal, to grow, to find joy again after pain. 1 month later, we gathered for another family dinner. This one a celebration rather than a trap. The location was my home rather than a restaurant. The guests a carefully chosen group who had helped us through the darkest period of our lives. Patricia and Sam were there, along with Julian Morris and his wife. Eliza Hoffman had come, now a friend rather than a vigilant stranger. And most significantly, a solemn-eyed boy named Michael, officially David's foster son with adoption proceedings underway. As we settled around the table, I took a moment to appreciate the unlikely family assembled before me. Tragedy had brought us together, but choice kept us connected. The deliberate decision to build something meaningful from the wreckage Jennifer had left behind. Before we eat, I said, raising my glass, I'd like to propose a toast to justice in all its forms, to truth, however painful, and to second chances, which sometimes arrive in unexpected ways. Around the table, glasses lifted in response. David caught my eye, his smile genuine, the shadow of pain gradually giving way to hard-earned wisdom. Later, as guests mingled in the living room, I found myself standing beside the mantel with Eliza Hoffman. I never properly thanked you, I said quietly. Without your warning that night at Lorenzo's, things might have ended very differently. Eliza shook her head. I spent 2 years tracking Jennifer, trying to prove what she did to my father. watching, waiting, gathering evidence that was never quite enough for the authorities to act. When I saw her with your son in that society page photo, I felt physically ill, knowing another family was in danger and feeling powerless to stop it. Not powerless, I corrected gently. You saved my life with that note. You saved yourself, she countered. You noticed what others missed, trusted your instincts when it would have been easier not to. That's rare, especially when the threat comes disguised as family. Across the room, David was showing Michael a model airplane, their heads bent together in concentration. The boy's serious expression occasionally broke into flashes of delight, glimpses of the carefree child he might have been and might still become. Family is what we make it, I observed. Sometimes by birth, sometimes by choice. Eliza followed my gaze to David and Michael. Your son is a good man. Turning personal tragedy into a mission to help others takes extraordinary strength. He comes by it honestly, I said, thinking of Mary, and how she would have approved of this gathering, this healing. We all have choices in how we respond to betrayal. Jennifer chose to weaponize her pain, to inflict it on others. We're choosing a different path. As the evening progressed, I found myself deeply content in a way I hadn't expected to feel again after Jennifer's betrayal. The dinner that had begun as a celebration became something more profound, a reclaiming of trust, security, and hope that had nearly been stolen from us. When the guests had departed and only David and Michael remained, helping me clean up in comfortable domesticity, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a restoration of something essential that had been briefly endangered. Dad, David said as they prepared to leave, Michael has a baseball game next Saturday. First of the season. We were hoping you'd come. I wouldn't miss it, I promised, crouching slightly to address Michael directly. What position do you play? Second base, the boy replied, his shyness giving way to enthusiasm. Coach says I have quick hands. That's excellent, I told him. I played second base myself many years ago. Really? Michael's eyes widened. Maybe you could show me some tricks? I'd be honored, I said sincerely. After they left, I stood in the doorway watching their car pull away, struck by the ordinary miracle of this moment. A grandfather, a father, a son. Roles Jennifer had nearly destroyed in her quest for wealth and control, now rebuilt with greater appreciation for their precious fragility. The lessons of the past year had changed me profoundly. I'd learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong, to question charm when it seemed too practiced, to value transparency over convenience. I'd discovered that the most dangerous predators weren't strangers lurking in shadows, but those who infiltrated lives through deception and manipulation. Most importantly, I'd realized that the true measure of wealth wasn't in assets Jennifer could have stolen, but in relationships she had never understood or valued, the kind built on genuine care and mutual respect. As I closed the door, I knew with certainty that we had not merely survived Jennifer's plot, but had emerged stronger for having faced it. The dinner I had once called to announce my will had revealed something far more valuable than any inheritance: the resilience of authentic family bonds against those who would exploit them. In the stillness of my home, I offered a final silent toast, not to the past we had survived, but to the future we were reclaiming, one careful step at a time. Have you ever encountered someone whose intentions toward you didn't feel right, but others couldn't see what you saw? Trust your instincts, like Baxter did in this story. They're often recognizing danger signals before your conscious mind can process them. Comment below about a time your gut feeling protected you from harm and how you responded to that inner warning. If you found this story meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to be reminded to trust their instincts too. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most important evidence isn't what you see, but what you feel.